Welcome everyone and good evening. I'll start first of all with our land acknowledgement. This place where we gather is located in the traditional and treaty territory of the Mississauga and Chippewa nations. We offer our gratitude to the First Peoples for their care and teachings about our earth and our relations. May we honor those teachings. So, welcome again. Can I have a show of hands from anyone who's new here tonight? Fantastic. Thanks for coming out. We're so glad to see new people, and all of you who have been here before, welcome back. I did not say the old people. I was really careful. Because I've been here so long, I would be among the oldest. Okay, a few quick things before we get started. The Connector campaign, or the Reconnector campaign for many of you, was launched today, and we've already had a number of folks signing up. Thank you. The modest annual giving amount of $50 makes a big difference when you multiply it by 150 people. So thank you very much for that. We'd also like to thank our sponsors. We've got sponsors: Watershed Magazine, Classical FM Radio, and Hermes Fine Foods, who has donated a gift basket that will be awarded to a lucky ticket holder at our November 13th event, which is all about foodies. So you don't have to have any ticket holder for any event, but buy them all, because that's good too. Okay, so tonight marks the very first event in our program on food, Feeding a Changing World. Our speaker, David Donnan, who's standing over there patiently, is going to set the table, and he's also going to do his own introduction. But I will say that, having had a lovely dinner with David, that what we hear tonight will be the tip of the iceberg about what this man knows about food. Ask him anything, and he will have an amazing answer. You can also talk about politics if you like, because he lives part-time in Chicago, but maybe Dave doesn't want to do that. So, without further ado, I present David Donnan.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Right, so I'm the first one of your whole series on feeding a changing world. So usually what I like to do is start off to really get to know the audience, okay? How many of you like to eat food? Just put your hands up. I think we've got a great crowd here. I think we're gonna just do perfectly. So before I get going, I wanna just tell a little story, okay? And the story really occurs about 75 years ago, 1950, way before any of your time. And it's about my wife's grandmother, Isabel. And Isabel was a farm wife. She lived on a farm in, anybody heard of Fawn Hill, Ontario? Yes. Okay, so she lived in the Fawn Hill, well actually she lived in Fenwick, which doesn't exist anymore, but Fawn Hill area. And she was a farm wife and lived on the farm, and as anyone, worked out on the garden, and her husband was tending greenhouses and various other things. But she would have to go and get groceries once a week, like anyone. And in town, there was a grocery store called Klager's, and Jim Klager was the guy that ran it. And once a week, Isabel would go and she would pick up her phone and say, Jim, I need to order some groceries for the week. And I need butter, and I need milk, and I need bread. And what do you have on special? He says, well, I've got some broccoli on special, and I've got some chicken on special. He says, okay, I'll have some of the chicken. And on Saturday night, I'm having the Smiths over for dinner. I would love to have some of your thick-cut pork chops. Do you have any of those? And he'd say, sure, for you, Isabel, I'll get those, and I'll cut them really good for you. And so she'd place her order and go through it, everything, hang up the phone, and she'd walk outside and go tend to the roses in the garden. Jim then would put everything together. He'd get into his old jalopy, and he'd drive up to the farm. He'd go inside, and he'd put the groceries into the shelves. He'd put the butter and things like that into the ice box. And then once a month, Isabel would pay her tab, okay? So just think about that. If you think about today, where we have all our e-commerce and DoorDash and Instagram and we have Uber Eats and AI and everything else, we're just trying to create something we already had 75 years ago. In fact, right now, it's becoming more and more complicated to make things simple. And so this simplicity that we're trying to get to is something that may have been part of our life before. And so we're using technology in that way. So let me introduce myself. I'm Dave Donnan, born in Toronto, actually born in Swansea. Anybody know where Swansea is? All right, Bloor West Village. Jak się majesz? Ja nie znaję. So that's all the Ukrainian I can speak. So grew up there, went to the University of Toronto, did my engineering degree, still have my iron ring, like a real iron ring, not those stainless steel replicants they give now. And then my first job was as an engineer with a company that no longer exists in name, was Canada Packers, and a big food company now called Maple Leaf Foods. And I worked at Canada Packers, and I was an engineer with them, an industrial engineer. I ran their industrial engineering department. I became head of technical engineering, and at the end, I ran one of their meat plants. So I became officially a meathead, as the term goes. I left there, and I actually then joined KPMG, the accounting firm, a consultant, and I became a partner there and ran their consumer and food group here in Canada. I was transferred by KPMG to Minneapolis, and I ran their consumer and goods and food consulting group for the US. And then I was hired by an international firm called A.T. Kearney consulting firm, and I ran their global food and consumer practice out of Chicago, where our kids, we grew up. They were all born in Canada, but we grew up in Chicago. I retired in 2020 and started teaching. So now I'm an adjunct professor at Northwestern University. I teach a graduate program, master's degree in the future of food and agriculture, which looks at policy, climate change, technology, nutrition, and its impact. And I serve on several boards. I was on the board of the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics, which represents the 110,000 registered dietitians in the US. On the board of the Foundation for Food and Agriculture Research, which is a research board out of Washington. And I'm on the board of Protein Industry Canada, one of the 5 innovation superclusters in Canada that's looking at the prairie provinces and the use of legumes and lentils and canola and other things and how to strengthen our agricultural place. So married, 2 boys, 5 grandkids. So enjoying life the best I can. And I have triple citizenships. I'm a Canadian by birth, US by naturalization, and my mom was born in Belfast, so I'm also an Irish citizen. So it's an EU passport before Brexit, yay. So, so all those together kind of make it for an interesting travel experience. So let's talk a bit about the food industry, and I'm just going to start with some interesting global facts. Some of you may know these, some may not. First of all, the food and agriculture business is a $10 trillion business globally. It's bigger than the energy industry, or it's bigger than the technology industry. It is huge. Over 1 billion people work in food and agriculture globally as well. That's 10%, and create 10% of the global GDP. So a very large organization. And on average, we produce 2,900 calories of food per person per day, all the industry. Now, why is that number 2,900 calories per day interesting or controversial? How many calories per day should an average male have? 2,100. How many calories should an average female have? 1,800 to 2,000, around there. So we're producing 2,900 calories a day. We produce more food than we consume. So this idea of we're running out of food, feeding, I mean, most of you probably remember in the 70s and 80s when we were all going to die of overpopulation. You all watched Soylent Green with Charlton Heston. That's actually not the case. But what we do have is, unfortunately, 30% of our food is wasted. So we're wasting it at harvest. We don't harvest everything because we don't have the right machinery or the right picking it or whatever, or the fruit is not looking right. It's not perfectly round potato or a blemish-free apple. We waste some of it in the transportation and in the manufacturing, but where do we waste it the most? At home and at restaurants and grocery stores. If you ever want to get a bit of a shock, go behind a Sobeys or a Loblaws or a Metro and look at their garbage bin after a weekend when all the bananas now are brown and the apples have blemishes and things, just dumping food. And so food waste, 30% of our food. So it means that 30% not only of food is wasted, but 30% of the energy that went into that food, 30% of the water that went into that food, 30% of the fertilizer, pesticide, herbicide, fungicide that went into that food is wasted. So we're wasting a lot of resources in that. And so food waste is a big issue that needs to be addressed within the industry. Second is 1/3 of greenhouse gases are produced in the food and agriculture industry. What do you think the biggest producing greenhouse gas from food and agriculture is? Livestock methane, that's number 2. Number 1 is removing trees in the Brazilian rainforest to plant more soy, because the U.S. policy means that China won't buy any of their soy, so they invested in Brazil to make more soy. So land use is probably the number 1 greenhouse gas effect of food and agriculture, but then methane, cow burps, by the way, it's not the other one, and is a major cause as well. And so a lot of work going on there. And then we have what I'll call the food dichotomy. There are 800 million people in the world that are food insecure or hungry. But there's also 1.5 billion people that are obese or overweight. So how do we have a world where 800 million people are hungry and 1.5 billion are overweight? What's going on? Why is this system not doing what it is? And how do we have so many hungry people and not being able to address it? So one of the questions really is, can we feed the world? We know we produce enough food, but are we producing the right type of food? Are we producing in the right place? Is it getting to the right people? All of these things. So we really have to be able to put together what I'll call a simple equation for understanding, can we feed the world? So that simple equation is the following. 1, number of people in the world. Right now, 8.1 billion people in the world, okay? Probably going up to around 10 billion by 2075. We're actually slowing down. So right now, 8.1, getting up to probably a maximum of 10 billion people in the world. We have to multiply that by what we eat. So number of people by what we eat has to be equal to or less than the planet Earth. We can't eat more than we have resources to put it. Now, one of the issues here is that what we eat is an important factor. And if you look at what we eat here, it's called the Standard American Diet. SAD, SAD for short. Carbohydrate rich, protein rich, fat rich, salt rich, sugar rich. If we, all 8 billion people, in fact, let's go even further, the 10 billion people in 2050, if they ate the same standard American diet that we eat every day, we would need 5 planet Earths. That's how much resources are going to be needed to. So this is unsustainable. What we're eating today is fine for us, but for 8 billion, 10 billion people, it is an unsustainable exercise. So let's look a bit about food and globally and where it comes from and what people eat and get an understanding of how these things can interact with each other and how they can change. So let's talk a bit about that geography of food around the world. So, first of all, our geographic culture has always defined our food. So think about it. We talk about Japanese food. I'm from Japan. I have Japanese food, and we eat Japanese food. Or we may eat Mexican food. Or we may have Indian food. Or we may have French food. So we've always defined food in terms of the geography it came from, and the culture and the geography. Well, what's happened is that has shifted over the last several years. And so now we're actually seeing a case where our food defines our culture. And think about the various people and how they define themselves. I'm a vegan, I'm a vegetarian, I'm a pescatarian, I'm a carnivore. The best one I like is a flexitarian. Do you know what a flexitarian is? Somebody who is a vegetarian during the week and a carnivore on the weekend, okay? So we find people now that when we are introduced to them, they don't say, I eat French food. It's I'm a vegan, or I define myself in terms of the diet I eat. And so this change in culture around food, we've got what's called food tribes, or groups of people that tend to eat the same type of food. Now, let's look at a simple but complex voyage. Here's a simple peanut butter and jelly sandwich. Now, I am allergic to peanuts, so I'm not going to have one. But I give you an example of how does a peanut butter and jelly sandwich get put in front of you, and where does it come from? Okay, let's start with the bread. The wheat probably came from Canada. Canada's a great wheat producer, wheat exporter around the world. Sugar maybe from Brazil, or could come in Canada, could come from Cuba. Okay, in the United States, it mostly comes from Minnesota, sugar beets. But the sugar here may come from Brazil, and the salt, Pakistan. Most of the salt we harvest in North America goes to road salt. So salt for consumption, Pakistan's a big producer of that. If we look at the peanut butter, the peanuts, Argentina is a big supplier of peanuts. And the oil, the oil that's used, the peanuts in, most likely is some sort of palm oil coming from Malaysia, so around the world. And the jelly, the fruit may be coming from Spain, or sorry, the fruit from Mexico, I'm sorry, the sugar from Brazil, and the pectin from Spain. So even though it's a simple peanut butter and jelly sandwich, it has implications of world sourcing. And that's what kind of is an interesting position we're in globally right now. The world is going through deglobalization. We've gone through this whole thing with the world trade and global trade, and now we're going towards more sort of country by country and blocks. The food industry is definitely a global industry. And they have large companies like ADM and Cargill and Bunge and that are basically buy wheat from Russia and sell it to China and vice versa. And so it's having significant impacts on the industry right now. But let's look at going back to this population situation. These are looking at the various world city populations around the world. By 2030, there'll be 39 cities with over 10 million people in them each. 39 cities with 10 million people. By 2050, there'll be 50 cities with with over 10 million people. Guess when Toronto will reach the 10 million mark? 2050 is the estimate that Toronto will reach 10 million people. So it's on the map as well. But you can see these pockets of concentration in urban. In fact, we have passed the point now where we're more urban than we are rural. So something like 65% of the world population are in urban centers now, not in rural. And that's shifted in the last 50 years significantly. And people that live in cities have different food requirements than people that live in the country as well. So another question is, see that circle? More people live in that circle than live outside that circle. So the concentration of what people eat in that area is going to have a profound effect on global agriculture. Because we're seeing, China says, I don't want to buy soybeans from the US, and look what happens. Farmers are struggling now in the US because all of their soybean crops are not being sold. So the issues around demographics and population with what we eat are a fundamental part of that equation that we talked about. Now, getting back to your question, births and deaths. Here's where we're seeing the number of deaths, number of births. You can see the impact of COVID on deaths. But by 2070, probably 2080, we're going to have more deaths than births. We're going to be declining population worldwide. Okay? Right now, we're right about here. So there's still a gap. We still have growth in Africa, growth in South America and parts of Asia. But we are going to see this tipping point where, because of the fact that many countries are below that 2.1 replacement value of births per woman of childbearing age, we're going to see declines. So what countries in the world do you think are actually declining population right now? Japan, absolutely. Next one. Korea, next one. Italy, next one. Close, but I'm going to explain that one in a second. Russia, Greece, Spain. There's quite a few of them. Canada, without immigration, has a population growth rate of 1.6, so we would be declining. The US similarly has a population growth of 1.8 without immigration. So both countries would decline if we did not have immigration coming in. And so that's where a lot of the policy discussion goes right now. Because we're finding that we're just not having the number of children that we used to. In Africa, they're still having 3, 4, 5 children per woman of childbearing age, but it is declining rapidly as women get educated, as we move to urban centers. I mean, when you're on the farm, having more kids means more free labor. When you're in a city and having more kids means more cost. And so we're seeing that shift to urbanization is having an effect on birth rates as well. And in fact, if you look at things like China, China is actually, right now, if you look at the numbers, is on the decline. So China's population, although large, is actually in the point of reaching its peak and then starting to decline. And in fact, India has a larger population now than China. That occurred in 2023 when that got surpassed. But you can see the rise of Nigeria and Pakistan and Congo as being sort of the next population booms. And actually, in this case, the United States just flatlines and flattens out. So these are all going to have an implication on our future food system. If we see declining populations, but more importantly, aging populations. China's going to reach a point probably in the next 10 years where there's going to be not enough people 60 years old or younger to run their factories. And that's going to be an economic issue at that point in time. But let's look at what happens. More importantly, population is one figure. But I think the real thing, even if we have a sort of slowing down of population, a capping of population, the more important thing is, what does the population eat? And population, what they eat, their culinary focus, their dietary focus is based on how wealthy they are. And in fact, as you move from lower income countries to middle income countries to higher income countries, you see a change in diet. And that is pretty profound. Let's look at an example of China. So China, the orange is in 1980s, and the blue is the 2010s. And what it is we look at staple cereals, animal protein, legumes and pulses, fruits and vegetables, and oil and processed foods. And what you can see is, as you move from sort of lower income country, in 1980, the GDP, the gross domestic product per person in China, was $195. In 2024, the gross domestic product in China per person is $19,061, okay? So you can see the shift going, that you eat a lot less staple cereals, the wheats and the corns and stuff. You eat more animal protein, a lot more. You have kind of a slight decline in legumes and pulses. You eat more fruits and vegetables and eat more processed foods. So as income increases, as you become middle class, you start to eat more animal protein and more processed foods as a population. And so what will that do? Well, let's just look at the population growth. I showed you how we're flatlining, how we're declining in some countries, how China is actually on the decline. But 795 million new middle class people will come online in the next 5 years. If I take the population of Canada, Mexico, and the US and multiply by 2, I still am less than this number. 90% of that 795 million new middle class will be in the Asia-Pac region. So you can see here, North America, flatlined. Europe, flatlined. South Central America, flat. Asia-Pacific, boom. Sub-Saharan Africa going up, and Middle East, North Africa going up. So that is probably going to be the most impactful part of our global food system, is the fact that populations are getting wealthier. They're becoming better off. They're having higher income, and as a result, we change our diets. And what diet are they changing to? SAD, Standard American Diet. We can't do that. So what you're seeing right now in China particularly is this whole issue around pork. China has 9% of the global population, yet it has 15% of the pig population. So it has more pigs than anywhere else. And what do they feed the pigs? Soy. And where do they get the soy? They used to get it from the US, now they're getting it from Brazil. But China has a policy now basically to reduce meat consumption. They're putting in programs to help their people, because they eat a lot of pork, to reduce meat consumption, reduce pork consumption, maybe move to more chicken, more legumes, lentils, plant-based proteins, because they realize it's unsustainable what their current trajectory is about. Okay, now I've given you all the heavy news. Now I'm going to lighten it up a bit, okay? We're going to do some fun facts. Are tomatoes a vegetable? No. What are they? Fruit. Tomatoes are a fruit. You all are smart. Now I'm going to ask you a question of intelligence. If tomatoes are a fruit, do you put them in a fruit salad? No, you do not put tomatoes in a fruit salad. Okay, so that's showing intelligence. And now the question of wisdom. If tomatoes are a fruit, what's ketchup? It's just a fruit smoothie. So we look at the impact that these have. Let's go back to the serious slides again. So how did we get where we are? It's called the policy of abundance. So if you follow the history of food and agriculture, we're now in our fourth agricultural revolution. The first one occurred in 12,000 BC when we actually learned to farm and domesticate animals. The second one occurred in the 1500s in Europe when we started to use rudimentary fertilizers and farming techniques. The next one occurred in the 1970s called the Green Revolution, Norman Borlaug and the use of hybrid wheats. And the fourth one is a debate. It was supposed to be genetically modified plants, but people kind of rejected that, and now it's around automation and food technology and agricultural technology. But the policy of abundance came out of World War II. And what it did was it really was the United States policy to show the world that democracy in the American way would defeat communism. So what they did was they said, we're going to make sure our farmers are producing the most they can. We want to increase the production of the farms. Coming out of the 1930s with the dust storms and the Dust Belt and all of that, they wanted to reinvigorate agriculture. And this is a picture in 1959 of Nikita Khrushchev standing in a grocery store in the US looking at the abundance of products in the grocery store. And so the idea was a system designed for efficiency, designed for abundance, designed for low cost. And that was how our food industry got designed. And so we have an efficient system, low-cost system. We produce a lot of food in North America. However, to achieve that abundance, we had to rely more on, when you want to make more of something at a lower cost, what do? You have to standardize it. Okay, it's like cogs in a wheel. I got to, punch out the same cog. So I got to, rather than having 15 types of apples, I will have 3 types of apples. Rather than having 6 types of soy, I'll have 1 type of soy. Right now we have 1 varietal of bananas. And if we ever get a pandemic in bananas, we will lose what we now know as that long yellow banana. And we'll have to go to the Indonesian bananas, which are more squat. But so we got monocropping, we got animal confinement systems, large, I don't know if any of you have been to large factory farms. And we also got a lot more chemical inputs, fertilizer, pesticide, herbicide, fungicides. So all of these things were needed to industrialize our agriculture and food system in order to show abundance and low cost. If you look at the cost, the percentage of household income spent on food, in Canada, the US, it's less than 10%. In most other countries in the world, it's 20%, 25%, 30%. Africa, 45, 50% of your household budget is spent on food. We spend next to nothing on food comparatively to other countries in the world, yet we still complain about high costs of food. And so when we look at the impact that this has had, it really has created this very efficient system, but a system that is also restraining what we can produce. And in fact, in the blurb to this session, we talked about 75% of all of the food we eat come from 12 plants and 5 animals. Let's go through them, okay? So we start off with, we've got sugarcane, corn, rice, wheat, potatoes, and then soybeans. Cassava, tomatoes, bananas, onions, apples, and grapes are the 12 of the vegetables and fruits or plants. And then the animals are pigs, chickens, cows, sheep, and goats. Represents 75% of what we eat. You know, if you look at, we've lost a lot of the biodiversity that we've had because what we've done is we've actually created, I think I've got some, give me a second here, I have actually some numbers here that may help. Boom, boom. Here we go. Yeah, so the biodiversity, we've actually reduced the number of types of animals we have, we've reduced the number of vegetables we've had, reduced the number of fruits because we wanted to become more efficient and low cost. But we've lost biodiversity because of that. If you look at the global agricultural system, we talk about the 3 F's of agriculture: food, feed, and fuel. So, you know, we have crops, we have wild catch fish, we have aquaculture fish, and we have livestock. We reduce food, feed, and fuel. And if you put it all together in one big bucket, 55% of these inputs go into food, 36% go into animal feed, and fuel gets about 9%. However, if you look at it by crop, it's much different. So if I look at corn, so corn's a major row crop going in. Corn, what percentage of corn that we produce do you think is that we eat as food? Huh? Yeah, it's 8%. So 35% of the corn we produce is for animal feed. 33% is for ethanol or fuel. And 14% is for exports. Again, abundance, low cost. The whole system, particularly in Canada, but particularly in the US, but also in Canada, we have built our agricultural system that we depend on exports. Look at the impact we're having now because China doesn't buy canola in Canada. And look what's happening now because China has decided not to buy soy from the US. Most of the farmers depend on selling export corn, export soy, because that's the way they can get the low cost by having large volumes, using the automation, using all the fertilizers and other agriculture chemicals to produce this amount. And so it really is facing an issue that a lot of the land we're using is not producing food. So when you hear the thing going, well, you know, we got to be careful because we're not going to be able to feed the world if we don't bail out the soy and corn farmers, that's bull hockey, okay? Because so little of it is actually food. I don't know how much tofu you eat from soy, but I don't think it's enough to justify the amount of land in Indiana and Illinois and Ohio that is going to soy production, because it's all going to feed production for China. So that has to change. So what can we do? So I'm going to go through a little thought exercise with you, okay? What if I took 1 acre of corn and made it into ethanol? How far could I drive an F-150 truck, which is probably the truck they're driving on the farm anyways? About 6,600 miles. So 1 acre of land, growing corn, I can produce ethanol for a truck for 6,600 miles of transport in a year. What do you think it would be if I took that 1 acre of land and put solar panels on it to power an F-150 Lightning truck, which is the EV version of the F-150? How many miles do you think I could drive? Many, many more. That's not exact enough. Look how many miles I could drive an F-150 Lightning truck. 825,000 miles. Okay? So it's not a little bit more, it's magnitudes more. So, so when farmers are producing corn for ethanol, the question is that the most efficient use of our land? Okay? Particularly if it's what's called marginal land, which is land that doesn't have good soil, or doesn't have good drainage, or doesn't have good water. We have to put extra water, we have to put extra fertilizer, we have to put extra chemicals on it to grow corn, when maybe some of that marginal land should just be put into solar panels. And in fact, right now, there's a thing called agrovoltaics, which basically says put the solar panels 2 meters high, and then either put goats or sheep underneath it, or shade vegetables, lettuce, carrots, kale. Well, I don't know about kale. But yes, lettuce and carrots. So there are options that are now available that it's not just a matter, again, you'll hear farming groups say, oh, we need to get better EV ethanol mandates. We're gonna use it for biofuels. No, because biofuels are probably one of the most inefficient ways of using our land right now. So interesting discussions as solar panel costs come down. This is a debate because there's many farmers who will say, I don't want solar panels anywhere near my farm because they think it degrades the land, where in fact, for marginal land, it actually will enhance it. So when you look at this in the farmland, one of the big things is the environmental impact. This is climate change is leading to greater volatility of food prices and supplies, and this looks at different climatic events, floods, storms, droughts, wildfires, extreme temperatures, and you can see that since 1980, they've increased dramatically. And so now you see major events affecting our agricultural system. So for example, how many of you have been out to the Okanaga Valley and saw the wildfires? Now they destroyed the vineyards there. Or the same thing in Napa or Sodoma down in California. We have heat stress in Europe. One of my students wrote a paper on champagne production and how it's going to be affected by heat stress. Guess where the new sparkling wine growth center in Europe is? England, absolutely. And you know what else they're growing in England now on an experimental basis? Rice. Never grown it before, but now the environment is such. So what we have is a situation where heat stress, drought, storms are affecting, and because of the volatility, are affecting our agricultural output. Now this year is probably going to be a bumper year for agricultural output. We've had really good weather, haven't had much floods, there hasn't been as many storms. But what happens when you have a lot of agriculture produced at once? The prices drop because you got too much, it's all on commodity basis. So farmers are finding they're having great years, but A, they can't sell it because China doesn't buy it anymore, and B, the prices have dropped dramatically. So they're in a bit of a pickle right now. Not literally though, but yes. So what's ahead? Where do we go from here? What's going to be the food industry? You like this little graph? I love this. How many of you watched Lost in Space, the original one? Yeah, there you go. Danger, Will Robinson, yes, of course. So the global food industry, there's going to be 5 areas of concern going forward over the next 10, 20, 30 years. One is health and nutrition. Food is inexplicably linked to health, as you know. So how is that going to impact the food industry and the design of the food industry and how we produce it? Second is access and equity. We produce enough food, but it's not getting to the right people. How do we have 2,900 calories per person when we only need 2,100 calories, and yet we have people that are hungry? Third is climate, as we saw in the previous slide, the volatility that's occurred with climate change. And Canada actually should be a net beneficiary of climate change because we're seeing the warm North American climate coming up into Canada. So you're seeing corn grow in Canada, soy growing in Canada. The wine regions are getting better. So I think those are all good for Canada anyways. Global trade disruption, conflict, embargoes have all had significant impacts. The whole global trade, as I mentioned earlier, the agriculture system is based on a global map, has changed significantly because of all these conflicts. And then finally, technology. New processes like plant-based foods, plant-based meats, precision agriculture, vertical farming are all technologies that are having an impact as well on the future design of our food system. I have talked about the Canadian food system as being mirrored by pinch points. And what I mean by that, we have about 190,000 farms in Canada, and we feed about 41 million consumers. But going from farm to your fork, there's steps in between. So in fact, if you look at it, 8% of the farms control 40% of the acreage. So we have some very concentrated farms that have grown and are owned by one person. 4 companies control 90% of the genetics. So seed genetics and animal genetics are controlled, most of them are controlled by 4 companies. Syngentas of the world and others. 82% of our beef is processed by 4 companies. Pork, 63%. So we're seeing high concentration of some, again, why? Because we want to be efficient, we want to be this policy of abundance, this monoculture. We've gone to larger and larger companies being able to get the economies of scale and the costs down. And then retailers, three grocers control 60% of the grocery stores. So we've got a concentration there as well. So although we've got 190,000 farms and 41 million consumers, it goes through a very narrow channel in between where the costs are controlled, et cetera. As we said, we produce enough food to feed the world, but regional disparities exist. So what we talk now, less about hunger and more about nutritional deficiency. And the idea here is hunger, you usually think of a person starving because they're not getting enough calories. But an obese person is also nutritionally deficient as well. They're getting enough calories, but they're not getting enough nutritious calories. And so they have a whole series of health issues as well. So this idea of nutrient deficiencies, and you can see by the, we're in North America, we have no problem, but you can see the various countries in Africa, the Middle East, and Southeast Asia are having a problem. And so we're also finding, due to climate change, decreasing nutritional quality of crops. Because of the overuse of fertilization and the overuse of agricultural chemicals, nutritional value of many of our crops have declined over the last 20, 30 years. We're seeing this idea of food loss and waste that we talked about, 30%, environmental factors, and poor nutrition absorption. Some people just are not, particularly if you're not getting enough nutrient-dense foods, you find stunting. If you look at India, for example, a lot of the population, mostly males, are less than 5'2" tall because they've never had the nutrients in the first 3 years of life. They didn't get the right balance of vitamins and minerals they needed. And so these all come together. But at the same time, you go back to our standard American diet, we love meat. And so if you look at this as a per capita meat consumption, and over here is per capita GDP, you can see, the number one over here, the US, largest meat consumer and also the largest per capita GDP. There's Canada. We're not far behind, okay? And so Australia, Canada, Spain, US, Germany, Argentina are all big meat consumers. All right? And so how do we ensure that we can support that meat consumption as populations grow, as wealth increases? The problem with meat is the following, is the conversion ratio. For chicken, 1 kilo of chicken requires 3 kilos of grain to feed the chicken to grow it. For pork, 1 kilo of pork requires 9 kilos of grain. And for a beef, 1 kilo of beef requires 25 kilos of grain. So think about how much land I have to segment, allocate to soy and corn and other feed in order to make this. So if China and Southeast Asia, with their 795 new middle-class consumers, decided to eat like we do up here, it's going to require a significant increase in grain production around the world. And not only that, water consumption. 1 kilo of chicken takes 4,300 liters of water. 1 kilo of pork, 6,000 liters. And 1 kilo of beef, 15,400 liters of water just to grow it, okay? So, yes, as farmers will say, beef, you take sunlight and convert it into protein, but not very efficiently from that perspective. So these all become big issues. And then if you look at it from a global perspective on global protein demand to 2030, you can see industrial countries here, 13% increase in protein consumption, Latin American 42, East Asia 55, Northeast Africa, Sub-Saharan Africa, and South Asia. 121% increase in beef consumption. They're not eating much of it now, but the meat consumption I mean, and then East Asia. But the problem is going to be, if these numbers continue the way they're going, we'll require a 100% increase in grain production worldwide in the next 10 years. We've never done that as a civilization. Where's the extra grain going to come from? We've kind of reached almost peak yield from grain right now, from soy, wheat, and corn. We haven't got much other land. The only other land is the Brazilian rainforest and some parts of Africa, which don't necessarily have good soil. So we're going to have to figure out how to do this. And this is not an easy solution. So, getting back to it really is what we eat has the most profound effect on our ability to feed the world and to have the right nutrient density food for people around the world. And so I think that's the key thing that I think each of you to think about is how do we make the influence on what we eat such that it will help the planet, help ourselves, healthy, environmental, all of those aspects. Because on our current trajectory, we're going to crash. And so we have to figure something out. So if we look at it, which really leads to, we know that 60% of non-communicable diseases are nutrition-based, are food-based. So look at it. Dietary risks. These are typically things like obesity and stunting and malnutrition, but we also have high blood pressure, which is directly linked to what we eat. High body mass, directly linked to what we eat. Diabetes, directly linked. High cholesterol. 60% of non-communicable diseases, things like, again, diabetes, hypertension, obesity, are all diet-related. And so the question becomes, what health implications are our systems as we look at healthcare costs rising every year? At what point does the healthcare system and the food system crash? At what point do doctors and nurses and hospital systems say, we can't keep on paying for this? I mean, the number of people that are in dialysis through diabetes, is there something we can do to reduce sugar consumption? Something we can do to get healthier food? So these become policy issues that governments face, and the question is, how best do we influence our consumers who love to eat what they eat? Food is a social construct. You usually eat food with other people. You eat food that you like. You have a culture, behind what you eat. It's difficult to influence it. Unlike tobacco, where we can put in incentives to have people stop smoking, to have people eat different foods is much more difficult. The good news is that if we look at what are the key factors that people use when determining what food to buy at a grocery store, health has now moved to number 3. So when you look at any type of food, what are the factors that go through a consumer's mind to buy? Number 1 is taste. It's got to taste good. Number 2 is price. It's got to be something I can afford or feel value in. Number 3 is health. It used to be convenience. But now I think everything's convenient. The fact that I can pick up my phone and order an Uber Eats and have it delivered to the back door while I'm speaking, that's pretty convenient. And number 5, down the list, environment. So we all talk about, methane from cows. We really don't care, okay? Because we want our meat. So, but the idea that taste, price, and convenience, there's a great quote. Doug Connaught, who is the CEO of Campbell's Soup, made a great comment. Somebody said to him, why aren't you producing more low-salt soups? And he said, no salt, no fat, no taste, no sales. And that's because taste is the number 1 thing that draws us to food. But we, as a population, are also on a lot of diets. 54% of consumers subscribe to a specific diet or health program. So high protein. We're on a protein craze. People are adding protein to their shakes and protein to their drinks and protein to their tea, protein to their coffee. We overconsume protein. We eat like 20 to 30% more protein than we really need. But right now it's the trend. So high protein diets, mindful eating. I have no idea what that is. I just think basically you have to talk to your food before you eat it. So. Intermittent fasting. Oh yeah, that works. I do that every night when I go to bed and then wake up in the morning. Calorie counting is another one. Clean eating, low carb, gluten-free, Mediterranean diet. Any of these ones ring true with any of you? The one I like the best is the Chinese chopstick diet. You can eat anything you want, but you only can use one chopstick. So the dean of and cardiologist of Tufts University, Dr. Dariush Mozaffarian, quote is, poor diet is among the greatest health and societal challenges of our time. And his comment is that unless we change our diet, not only are we going to, have environmental consequences because of the methane and the water usage and all the grain, but we're going to destroy our health as well. And we have to change it, but we have to figure out how to change it. How do we change our diets such that we as a population become healthier, but at the same time get the food we want? A lot of it depends on nutrition and dietitians. So I have a little, hopefully this video works. This is a video about the time-traveling dietitian, okay? Let's see if I can get it working. Thank you.
Oh, you're terrible.
Wait! Stop! Don't eat that food!
Who are you?
I'm from the that food. Why not? The eggs. They're full of cholesterol.
What?
Cholesterol. It clogs up your arteries. Eating even just one egg can dramatically increase your chance of heart attack. Don't eat eggs.
Oh my God, thank you.
You're welcome. Godspeed.
Well, I guess I better take those eggs.
Wait! Stop!
You're back.
Yeah. We were wrong about the eggs.
How?
Well, it turns out there's two types of cholesterol. There's good cholesterol and bad cholesterol, and eggs actually have both. So you can eat eggs, but just don't eat the egg yolks. So stick with the egg whites.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah. Godspeed. Wait! We were wrong about the eggs.
Again?
Yeah. Yeah, okay, so it turns out that the amount of cholesterol in a food doesn't actually affect how much cholesterol ends up in your blood. The eggs are probably fine. In fact, we sort of don't even know what cholesterol is. But the steak! You can't eat the steak!
Why not?
Turns out that red meat increases your chance of heart attack. You have to cut out red meat. So no steak!
Thank you.
Godspeed.
What? No steak, mister.
What?
Wait! We were wrong about the steak. It's the toast. Man was not meant to eat bread.
What do you mean man was not meant to eat bread?
Well, if you think about it, human beings should really only be eating what our Paleolithic ancestors ate. So, therefore, no bread, no toast.
How do you know what our Paleolithic ancestors ate?
Well, we just have to guess, right? I mean, we don't have any way of knowing. Whew. Okay. Went back to the Paleolithic. They are not doing well. I don't know what we were thinking. If anything, we should all be eating a lot more bread. Jeez. So I guess just ignore everything I've said and exercise.
Exercise, okay.
Yeah. Yeah, you guys could probably use it. You've been just sitting here for the last 35 years.
It's been 5 minutes.
Right. Time travel. All right, well, Godspeed. Turns out it's genetic. Doesn't matter whether you exercise or what you eat. I'm sorry I ruined your meal.
I need 10 minutes.
Do you want some eggs?
I'd love some.
I mean, as I said, having worked with a series of dietitians and nutritionists, it was always interesting to see how things change. I mean, science improves and changes, and we learn more. But the thing I always liked was they were always the first ones to go after the chocolate cake at the end of a meal. And one of the things to find out is people are you like your indulgences and like but you want good indulgences. So if I'm going to have chocolate, I want to have a good chocolate. If I'm going to have wine, I want to have a good wine, etc. So we came up with the phrase that if it's bad for you, if it's bad, it better be good. So that's the way we use it. So what's the new food consumer look like? Well, first of all, they're concerned about well-being and health. They're looking at the impact of their diet on their own health and how they can change that. The second thing they look at is they explore by grazing and snacking. So we used to have the 3 square meals a day. There are now 7 snacking occasions. And you can ask me after what I'll tell you. But yeah, there's 7 times during the day where we snack, okay? Then we want to eat healthy, but we also want indulgences, small indulgences, a little piece of chocolate, some ice cream, etc. Trust their friends and social media more than ads. None of us watch ads anymore, but if we're looking for some food or we want to know something about it, what do? We go onto Facebook, or we go and ask our friends and family about it as well. We mistrust the government and corporations. We don't think they're giving us the right information anymore. And finally, we're actively seeking information with the aid of technology. So we're using our phones and Google searches and everything else to try to find out more about what we eat. So here's a cartoon that I think is kind of saying we're asking different questions. And it shows a man holding up a cereal box that says, no sugar, no artificial colors, no GMO. And he says, I don't know what it is. I bought it for what it's not. And many of us do that. We look for what's not in an ingredient as part of our purchasing. The big area right now is this whole area of food as medicine. This is a big area in dietetics, in nutrition, around organic foods and healthy eating. And really it comes down to how does healthcare and the food industry start to deal with those conflicts. So things like food RX, food prescriptions. We're seeing subsidized community agriculture, nutrient-dense foods, healthy eating insurance premiums reduced similar to tobacco usage. So we're actually seeing in some cases some insurance companies incentivizing people to eat healthier and get lower rates if they do. Hospital incentives to buy local food, plant-based foods. If you look at the menus in a lot of hospitals now, much more plant-centric than they used to be. Increased medicinal food development. Nestle is putting a lot of work. I mean, Ensure you're all familiar with, but there's a lot of medicinal foods that are coming out now that are specifically around things like diabetes or for high blood pressure, etc. Global food companies develop nutrient-dense foods, and many of them are developing, for example, with the GLP-1, the Ozempics of the world, you're going to be protein and B12 deficient. So they're making snack bars that have more protein, like we need more protein. But for the people on those weight loss drugs, they're looking at putting more nutrient density into those. And there's a company actually in Africa that is growing plants like potatoes and tomatoes and things like that that have higher levels of zinc and vitamin A and other nutrients in order to help in the nutrient deficiencies. And then health taxes on sugar, ultra-processed foods or junk foods. Are those going to exist as well? So we're going to start to see taxes put on sodas. I mean, it's been experimented with and from different levels of success, but we may see more of those. So really, when we're reinventing the food system, we're looking for food that is 4 things. First, we're looking for abundance. We have to produce sufficient food to feed the people. But our ability to produce sufficient food is dependent on climate change, water availability, soil health, and food waste. We have to take into consideration. The second thing is it has to be available. We have to make sure that the food is available to people that are not necessarily near the farms. And so food that is available to everybody has to be affordable. We have to deal with the geopolitics of trade flow, and dietary changes that are going on as well. So the third one is health. How do we make sure food that benefits and does no harm? Food safety, nutrition availability, getting rid of unhealthy foods, food is medicine. And then finally, just. How do we ensure the food systems contribute to society and our communities? So fair wages, equity, getting rid of forced labor, shrimp farming and things like that, which use forced labor, and fair wages as well. So all of these together are what part of the overall food system design that we have to look at and influence any way we can. So I've got 4 questions I want you to go home with to think about, okay? Under food choices, climate impact, food justice, and the future. So the first question is, how much of what we eat is shaped by culture or convenience rather than nutrition? So the question to you is, if you had to change one element of your diet for better nutrition, what would it be? Okay, you don't have to answer, but just think about it, okay? Second area, climate. Should we be responsible to address climate change through our diets? Should governments nudge us with taxes, the stick, or the carrot through education? How do we influence dietary choices given its environmental impact? And how does government and ourselves work together on that? Third, food justice. Why is there $10 trillion industry, 800 million people go hungry? Should food be treated as a basic human right like water or education? And then finally, the future. What will a typical dinner plate look like in 20 years? Will it be better or worse than today? And the question for you is, how do you think our great-grandchildren's food preferences will differ from yours? Okay? So I'm going to finish off with one quote from that famous chef, Julia Child, who brought French cooking to the common person. And Julia Child has really said, I would say, the most influential quote about the food system, which is, the only time to eat diet food is while you're waiting for the steak to cook. Thank you very much. So I open up for questions.
Thank you so much, Dave. That was fantastic. So much to think about. So many questions. Kathy, do you want to help with the mic? Here's the other one. Okay, go ahead, sir.
Thank you. That was very interesting. One thing I've been thinking through your presentation is I am shocked that seafood did not show up as a major source of nutrition throughout the world. And I wonder if you could comment on that.
I think the challenge of seafood is because of our overfishing and the availability of seafood. Now, you saw that chart about where that showed, plant-based foods, seafood, aquaculture, and then livestock. So it's an important part of our food system. But I think a lot of seafood gets downplayed because we're worried about just having sufficient seafood. Now, aquaculture, shrimp farming, salmon farming, and other types of catfish farming, et cetera, have alleviated some of that. But I think a lot of people are just dealing with the issue of availability to a large degree. But that's a good question.
Yes. I haven't seen anything about politics because it's related to politics somehow. You're talking about changes when you have an election and you never hear any debate about what you were talking about, which is so important in the long run. I know elections is a short thing, but the importance of policies, of people voting for people who care for issues for the planet, for food, and so on.
Yes. Well, so have everybody available till around midnight? I mean, this is an entire section of what I teach is around this whole idea of geopolitical issues on policy. And so think about just policy decisions that have been made and the impact of feeding hungry people now with the cutbacks and all of the different spending there, on how we're funding farmers in order to, what types of crops. We're growing basically corn, soy, and wheat because they're monocrops. We can get all this money as cash crops for fuel and for feed, but are we actually feeding people nutritional food? Absolutely. Policy doesn't get brought up because, again, we've got an industrial system of food production with a lot of, this idea of the family farmer being a small farmer with a couple of kids that doesn't exist. The farmers are big, they're corporations, they're multimillionaires in many cases, and they're influential. So that's where we get back to that royal we. The only way to change is we have to individually be pushing back as well. Yeah.
I have to ask that you temper your comments when you're speaking about Canadian farmers, because they are not the corporations you're talking about.
They are not, except if you go out west in the large prairie provinces where they're not corporations, but they're very large farms. As you saw from the thing, 8% of the farms own 40% of the land. That's not small little family farms. So you've got a combination there. It's much more extreme in the United States, and it's much more extreme still in Brazil. So it's all a matter of kind of degree. Yeah.
I appreciate that we are growing for export. Is that necessarily a bad thing? Because on the other hand, we're importing, like oranges from Egypt as an example.
Yes. I mean, 10 years ago when we were into the global, basically the World Trade Organization and globalization, this whole idea, the food industry was built on this basically arbitrage. Grow where you best grow, sell to who needs it. And it was moving all around the world. We've sort of got away from that, and we're now into bilateral trade rather than global trade. So the question now that I'm getting from a lot of clients are, how do we get self-sufficiency in food? So right now, the Middle East, Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates are all trying to get self-sufficient in food. Singapore is trying to get self-sufficient in food. Korea is trying to get self-sufficient. What it means is they're not going to produce 100% of the food, but they want to produce more of the food. What we've done is we've gone the path of, where's the lowest cost, where can we produce it? So what foods that we can grow in Canada, we should grow in Canada. And we're not going to grow bananas, we're not going to grow oranges, but we should be using our own canola and wheat, and we should be doing our vegetables. And we've got some of the best greenhouses in the world in British Columbia and Ontario. We should be utilizing those. So, yeah.
I'm thinking of how you began the presentation of the family and the store and how the food was, the family on the farm and the grocer came and did that. And now, I don't know if I live in a bubble, but I hear a lot through the community I'm in of grow your own food.
Yeah.
Put in a raised bed and grow your own vegetables, and not somewhat out of the efficiency and maybe the desire to have food that has been grown properly. But is that even showing up in your research at all? That
it's a small part. I mean, grow your own food is a movement, it's a culture, but it's a blip on the map because we're not. Most people don't produce enough food to be self-sufficient. And so you can grow your own food, particularly in vegetables and maybe some fruits, but after you're there, you're still, you're going to grow your own wheat, you're going to grow your own corn, are you going to raise your own cattle? I mean, if you have a farm, yes, but that's a small proportion of the population. And many people are in urban settings. As I said, 60, 70% of Canadian population is in urban setting. They don't have access to grow their own food.
Yes, a number of years ago, there was talk about eating insects.
Yes.
Sustainability and their protein.
Crickets. There's 4 varieties of
rich.
crickets to eat.
Yeah.
Yes.
Is there any traction in that throughout the world?
None.
Yeah.
Crickets and basically soldier flies are being used for cattle feed. They're looking at it. So the big issue with fish feed and aquaculture is that we would feed fish, meaning we would take fish meal, which is basically the underutilized fish and everything, grind them all up into a protein powder and then feed it to fish. And we're getting disease and stuff going. So so there's a mandate globally now to replace fish meal in feeding fish. So the main places where you can get feed other than from fish feed is soy and canola are 2 big ones because they have good oil content, et cetera. But the other is insects. Insects for human consumption, why? Unless you are interested. They're in Asia, it's a delicacy and it's used, but as a source of protein, there are many other sources of protein that are just as efficient and more palatable by consumers. So I think it's more consumer perception is causing insects not to be used, but insects are used in animal feed, yes.
A question about what you mentioned is going on in China, how the government is trying to encourage more plant-based eating and less pork-based eating. Are they hoping to export their pork, or do they want to not produce it because it takes so many more resources?
Takes up many more resources. So the pig farms in China are environmentally damaging. They take a lot of resources. They just want people, and they realize people are getting fat in China. They're getting North American disease, and so sad, exactly. That's the diet, yes. So they're trying to get ahead of the health issue that's going to occur. Okay, yeah.
Oh, over here. There you go.
Just back to your demographic slide showing the deaths and births, you pointed out that really impressive blip for COVID.
Yeah.
There was another one down around 1960. What was that about? Do you know?
That was China with the great Mao Zedong's, what was it, the forced famine, yeah, the great whatever. That was it, yes. Good observation.
I want to ask a question about water, if I may, over here.
Oh, yeah.
We see in the far west the drying up of the Colorado River, which is now a trickle when it gets to the ocean.
Mm-hmm.
And when Trump was, forgive me for introducing politics, when Trump was elected, Adrian Clarkson said he's going to come after our water next.
Mm-hmm.
What are you hearing about the politicization of water?
Oh, so a great geopolitical strategist said, in the next 20 years, there'll be more wars over water than over oil. Water is the resource that, and particularly right now, I have a map that shows the water aquifers around the world. And the ones under stress right now are around Pakistan and India. There's some around China, the west coast of the U.S., Colorado River, et cetera, and some parts of South America, which are going to face droughts. I mean, they're just going to run out of, in Pakistan right now, they're worried the next 2 or 3 years they're going to just run out of water in certain regions entirely. So, is that it? Another question?
we've
or
got
oh,
3 more.
three more. Yes. Okay, right there. Sorry.
This one, and then this
Yeah,
one.
when you were talking about the consumption of protein and meat, no one ever talks about the cruelty that's involved in that
That's definitely true.
and the factory farming. I think if people went to see a factory farm, they would nenever eat meat again.
Well, I said I ran a meat plant. I still
know.
eat meat. Yes, and particularly if you go to what's the CAFOs, C-A-F-O, concentrated animal feeding operations. I mean, I've been to them where there's 100,000 cattle in a basically mud-infested, barren area, where they just feed them corn and you just fatten them up. And it's animal cruelty is part of the justice part of that slide about designing the future food system is around animal welfare, absolutely. But yes, it's not discussed enough. Most people don't know that their hamburger comes from a cow, so they think it comes from McDonald's. So. Yes.
Yes, you mentioned something about countries having the right to be self-sustaining in foodstuffs. In Canada, we have marketing boards, milk marketing boards. That years ago, I did my Master of Law in International Business Law. I looked at the Milk Marketing Board, did a study on that in paper. One of the things in the course of my study was what Cargill did to, I think it was a Central American country, Paraguay or somewhere in there, where they convinced that country to convert all their produce to coffee making. And as a result, they stopped growing rice and beans, which was basic to their diet. And then, of course, the coffee market died and you ended up with severe hunger.
Yes.
One of the things that seems to be always in discussions with the states, which I view not so much as a country but as a business, always wants to attack our milk marketing boards
well,
and
the
all
supply
of that
management
stuff.
side of it. Yeah.
Supply management, yeah. That was the words I was looking for. So do you care to comment on Canadians' ability to maintain our food self-sufficiency through marketing boards and the like? And the second part of that is how do we maybe broaden the channel between the farm and the consumer? Because you have described very almost a monopolistic type of structure between farm and consumer.
Yeah, so when Cargill did that, it was under what's called a policy of comparative advantage. And the idea of comparative advantage says you look at a climate and the soil and everything else, and you produce what it produces best, and then you're using the worldwide trading system. So if I produce all the coffee and you produce all the bananas, we can trade, okay? That only works when you've got free trade, which now we're not seeing as much. So that collapses very easily that way. as far as supply management and everything, I mean, there's a whole series of controversies and why it's done. It's done for political reasons, et cetera. Self-sufficiency in Canada. So I'm on the board of Protein Industry Canada, which is looking at how do we make a more robust food processing sector, particularly around our canolas and legumes and lentils and grains and things like that. And it's all about this idea of, you know, we're producing for export, but we need to figure out how to stop having to bring all of our fruits and vegetables from the Salinas Valley in California up here. We should be using greenhouse technology. It exists. There are hybrid greenhouses now using LED technology, positive air pressure, nutrient delivery systems that can produce all types of fruits and vegetables inexpensively into a controlled environment. Why don't we incentivize those rather than incentivizing other things? So it is I think, a debate that's going on right now. And this whole idea of self-sufficiency in Canada, we will never be 100% self-sufficient. But we're looking at 3 countries that are actually doing a better job of it than us. Singapore is one. After COVID, they realized because they got cut off from Malaysia and Indonesia, they need to be more self-sufficient. The next ones are the United Arab Emirates, et cetera. They're importing most of their food. They need to figure out how to grow under controlled environments because it's too hot in the desert. And then the third one is the Netherlands, which has done a fabulous job of agriculture, particularly around greenhouse technology. So I think, you know, we're looking for ways of bringing those things here.
I wondered if any of your work looks at packaging of foods.
What do you want to know about it?
Well,
I look at it, but so do you want to talk about the color of the ads on the front?
I want to know about how much.
How much packaging? Well, we've got the balance. Food safety on one side and over packaging on the other, okay? What is our tolerance for a food illness? 0. So we overpackage because we do not want to have any incident. Think about Maple Leaf Foods 10, 12 years ago with the listeria situation. We do not want to have a situation where people get sick with our food. So we will package it to the point that it will prevent that from happening. And as a result, we get overpackaging as well. Yes.
Wendy, did you have a question?
No, I'm good.
Oh, you're good?
Okay, well, I
Okay.
think we should probably take maybe one more
over there.
before we
I see a
let
hand
Dave-
up.
Who? Did you have a question? Okay.
Yeah, it's a question or maybe a comment. We talked about who's the we and what can we do. Just look at the last year, less than a year, when we demanded that our grocery stores start showing us what's made in Canada.
Wow,
or-
that
or
happened
alternatively-
quickly.
I mean, I go over to the Independent in Port Hope, and suddenly all their citrus fruit is from South Africa now.
Yeah,
We're
yeah.
not getting it from
No,
California.
that's, I mean, I always love, what was it? I think it was The Simpsons or some cartoon where they talked about, you know, how do we change, you know, what Walmart buys? And they said, well, in this room is the key brains behind Walmart and what they buy. And if you go in there, you can influence them. And they go in there and it's a mirror. You know, so as consumers, we have a lot of strength. So, okay.
Well, I think Kathy will want to say a few words
Okay.
to thank you. And before she does, just I think the audience appreciates so much that you took time to answer the questions so thoroughly, Dave. Thank you.
Yes, that was wonderful. Thank you, Dave. I've taken about 15 pages of notes, so I'll just quickly sum up what I've. Only kidding. Dave, I want to thank you for an engaging and informative presentation to kick off our food series. It's not a pun to say that you gave us a lot of food for thought, and I appreciate that. Just personal observations, we each will have our own because there was so much incredible information given to us, shared with us tonight. One is, I had no idea that my peanut butter and jam sandwich is global. I will look differently at that and think about what goes into something that we consider, you know, mom and pop. That we produce more than we consume. That is really sticking with me. That 75% of our food comes from 12 plants and 5 animals. Had no idea. Had absolutely no idea. And that the path forward, which seems like it is an uphill battle, and we don't have a lot of time to get there, by the sounds of it, is to reinvent the food system along the areas that you described: abundant, available, healthy, and just. It's a tall order. That's not going to be easy. And then the questions that you gave to us to go home with, plus whatever else you came up with. So I want to say thank you for all of that. I want to say also a thank you to you as the audience members for your engaged, attentive listening and your wonderful questions. I am always really impressed by the questions that you have for the presenters. Right. And I'm sure you appreciate that as someone giving a presentation to have such good questions. Our next event is on October 23rd. Jennifer Clapp from the University Waterloo, thank you, will speak to the globalization of food, trade, geopolitics, and global supply chains. So until next week, good night.